Good afternoon, Sir Numer and classmates. We are the Group 2 and our report is all about Chapter 3, Externalities and Government Policy. I'm the first reporter of our group. Let's start. Externalities are costs or benefits of market transactions not reflected in prices. Negative externalities are also called external costs. Are costs to third parties other than the buyers or the sellers of an item not reflected in the market price. An example of a negative externality is the dissatisfaction caused by the noise of low-flying aircraft as experienced by residents who are located near an airport. Positive externalities are benefits to third parties other than the buyers or the sellers of a good or service not reflected in prices. An example of a positive externality is the market for education. The more education a person receives, the greater the social benefit, since more educated people tend to be more enterprising, meaning they bring greater economic value to their community. Pecuniary externalities. When we say pecuniary relating to money matters, pecuniary externalities are the effects of increases or decreases in the price of a good on existing consumers as a result of changes in the demand or supply of a good. Here, we will apply the law of demand and supply. When the supply is more and the demand is less, meaning the price is low. Conversely, when the supply is less and the demand is more, meaning the price is high. Real externalities are unpriced costs or benefits. They are the effects of market exchanges external to prices. Real externalities have a direct resource effect on a third party. For example, pollution from a factory directly harms the environment. How do externalities affect efficiency? When negative externalities are present, it means the producer does not bear all costs, which results in excess production. With positive externalities, the buyer does not get all the benefits of the good, resulting in decreased production. This would result in decreased production and a more efficient equilibrium.
Good day, everyone. I'm KORIN SILVOSA, second reporter for Chapter 3. My topic is about internalization of externalities to corrective subsidies, a means of internalizing positive externalities. Internalization of externalities. It is the act of making an alteration in an establishment's private costs or benefits to make them equal to the company's social costs or benefits. The purpose of internalizing an externality is to reduce the cost of a negative externality by getting the people who are producing the externality to pay for the negative effects. Corrective taxes, a method of internalizing negative externalities. Corrective tax is a market-based policy option used by the government to address negative externalities. Governments use corrective taxes to reduce the use of products that harm well-being and create costs not just to society at large, but also to individual consumers who may underestimate the future health consequences of their current consumption. How a corrective tax could be used to reduce global warming. A corrective tax on the emission of carbon waste is one possible way to reduce the economic costs associated with global warming. Putting a price on carbon-based fuels in the form of fee or tax is an effective way of reducing greenhouse gases emissions and pollution levels across the globe. This can raise significant revenue for countries, which can then be used to address the economic harm caused by the burning of fossil fuels. Internalizing negative externalities associated with goods sold in imperfectly competitive markets. When a negative externality is associated with output sold by monopoly, two distortions prevent attainment of efficient output. The firm's monopolistic power results in less than the efficient output. On the other hand, because the monopoly causes negative externality. It produces more than the efficient output. The first best solution is to break the monopoly. The second best alternative is to allow the monopoly to continue operating. Corrective subsidies, a means of internalizing positive externalities. A corrective subsidy is a payment made by the government to either buyers or sellers of a good so that the price paid by consumers is reduced. This is similar in concept to a corrective tax. Corrective tax, increase in price, decrease in output. It's the opposite in corrective subsidies, decreases in price and increases in quantity. That's all. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Angelica D. PAGKALIWANGAN, the third reporter of Group 2, and my topic is all about property rights to resource use and internalization of externalities, the Coase theorem. So why do we get underproduction in the case of a positive externality and overproduction in the case of negative externality? It is because there's a party that is affected by the transaction but is not included in the transaction, and they're not included in the transaction because they don't have any property rights that are being traded in this process. This is an idea that was developed by Ronald Coase, and we have the Coase theorem that states the following. Number 1, if property rights exist. Number 2, only small number of parties are involved. And number 3, if transaction costs are low. So then the private transactions are efficient. So let's go through a couple of examples. If, for example, every time that I drove my car, I had to compensate someone for creating CO2 emissions, I would take that compensation into account when I drove my car. In other words, this external cost would be internalized because I would have to pay someone. The problem is that there isn't someone to pay because when I emit CO2 emissions, they go up into space or into the atmosphere and no one owns the atmosphere. Now suppose you own the atmosphere. You were the sole owner of the atmosphere, and therefore, every time someone wants to dump something in the atmosphere, we would have to pay you. You would charge us for the right of emitting CO2 emissions, and as a result, we would take this into account when we drive our cars. In other words, you, having the property rights, would internalize the externality. So, similarly with the positive externality, if someone owned the right to the benefits of education, they would pay someone to get educated. If I was the owner of civil society in America and I realized that educated people are better citizens, I would actually subsidize these people to get education knowing that I would benefit from this result. So again, if we have a well-defined property rights, the property rights themselves internalize the externality. So we get an efficient outcome in our markets. So that is all. Thank you for watching.
Good day everyone, I am MARIANNE JARAVATA and I will discuss to you the Chapter 3, Applying the Coase Theorem, Pollution Rights, Efficient Pollution Abatement Levels, Environmental Protection Policies in the United States, Emission Standards versus Corrective Taxes, and Command and Control Policies, and Environmental Quality. So first we have applying the Coase Theorem, Pollution Rights. Pollution rights are transferable permits to emit certain amount of particular wastes into the atmosphere or water per year. So how do transferable pollution permits works? They give companies a legal right to pollute a certain amount per fixed time span. So next, we have efficient pollution abatement levels. The efficient level of pollution is the quantity at which its total benefits exceed its total cost by the greatest possible amount. So the marginal social cost of pollution abatement is likely to increase with increased abatement. This only occurs where the marginal benefit of an additional unit of pollution equals to its marginal cost. Third, we have environmental protection policies in the United States. So, the primary method of treating the problem of pollution in the United States is government regulation. So, the government regulation is the rule that define bounds authority to control within the legal behavior to their areas of responsibility. Next, we have emission standards versus corrective taxes.
So, what is emission standards? Emission standards are governmentally promulgated limits on the emission of a pollutant from a process, while corrective taxes is a market-based policy option used by the government to address the negative externalities. So, what is the difference of emission standards sa corrective taxes? So, the emission standards are regulation, while ang corrective taxes are ways to meet those standards. Lastly, we have command and control regulation. It is a system of rules established by government authorities that requires all emitters to meet strict emissions standards for sources of pollution and requires the use of specific pollution control devices. So it also refers to environment policy that relies on regulation, permission, prohibition, standard setting, and enforcement as opposed to financial incentives that is economic instrument of cost. That's all, and thank you for listening.
Hello everyone, I'm JAREN PALMON and I'm the last reporter of Group 3. Market for pollution rights in practice, sulfur dioxide allowances, and capping and trading the rights to emit. So in July 1991, nation's largest commodity market, which is the Chicago Board of Trade, voted to create a market to emit sulfur dioxide. So this decision was made possible by the provision of the Clean Air Act of 1990, empowering the EPA or the Environmental Protection Agency to issue marketable rights to emit sulfur dioxide to electric power generating companies. So the tradable emission permits under the program to control sulfur dioxide are called allowances. So the goal of the program is to reduce acid rain from sulfur dioxide by cutting sulfur dioxide emissions from power generating plants. So the owners of power generating plants were given a fixed number of allowances each year. So these allowances is a tradable emission rights, or it is a permit which is entitled its holder to emit 1 ton of sulfur dioxide per year. Next, more on market-based approaches pollution control, how trading pollution rights can reduce the cost of environmental protection. Now, the EPA or the Environmental Protection Agency uses an emission offset policy. So, in most regions of the United States, under this policy, new firms can enter an area in which standards are already met or exceeded. So, provide next, more on market-based approaches pollution control, how trading pollution rights can reduce the cost of environmental protection. Now, the EPA or the Environmental Protection Agency uses an emission offset policy. So, in most regions of the United States, under this policy, new firms can enter an area in which standards are already met or exceeded. So, provided that they can pay other firms to reduce their pollutants in an amount equal to greater than that to be generated by the new firms. Benefits and cost of Environmental Protection Agency. The motivating behind environmental protection policy has been the protection of human health, and the standards has been set to provide benefits, so there is no doubt that the EPA reduced emissions of such harmful gases. The Clean Water Act of 1972 established national goals for water quality. Water quality effects of emission were not considered. All emission were to be controlled. So the effects of Clean Water Act have apparently only been modest, although some rivers have shown remarkable improvements in water quality. That's end my report. Thank you for watching and listening.